Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming from the Ukrainian side of it, which name is Nord Stream 2 and its impact on the many countries. My name is Sergei Vasilkovsky, I'm the member of the Ukrainian Parliament, Parliament. Our speaker today is Mrs. Olga Vilkova, my colleague from the Ukrainian Parliament, Claire, the chairperson of Naftogaz, the state oil and gas company of Ukraine, Mr. Eugene Chorny, head of the Ukrainian World Congress, Canadian citizenship, and John Whittingale from British delegation, our colleague. I will start with a few words. Of course, we in Ukraine see the Nord Stream 2 is a completely political project which has no economical impact, positive impact. We see it as some kind of Russian political deal with some countries of the Europe, and the Nord Stream 2 undermines the security of Ukraine and of a number of OSCE participant states, not only in the field of the energy sector, but in all of the terms which security means. Because if Nord Stream 2 will be active, the countries that transit the Russian gas will be more vulnerable for Russia to engage directly, is in case of Ukraine interferes or indirectly. I will give the floor to presentation to Mrs. Olga Vilkova, and then we'll continue. Thank you.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for joining us for this, from what it may look like a technical issue, but it has very serious and damaging implications for my own country, which is Ukraine. I'd like to start by quoting my president, Mr. Petro Poroshenko. He says, and I quote, "It, Nord Stream 2, poses an extremely great danger, not only for Ukraine, and not only financial one, but I would like to note, it is a geostrategic danger and a danger to security as well." He said it in May 2018, as he was meeting with key leaders in Europe. Today we sit in Bundestag of Germany, which is one of the supporting countries for the project of Nord Stream 2. And I think it is important to remind ourselves that even Chancellor of this country, she acknowledges the potential big geopolitical implications for the whole region, not only for the countries involved, which are Russia, Germany, Ukraine, and some of the neighbors of Ukraine. Usually it is presented by the proponents of Nord Stream 2 as a very commercial project. However, Maroš Šefčovič, who is the European Commission's Vice President for Energy Matters, said recently, "I've never seen a commercial project so intensely debated at the highest levels of European politics. This project is really polarizing the EU." That's how we are, where we are right now. It is my job to advocate for the interests and of overall, interests of Ukrainian people and Ukraine as a state. So, of course, in my part, I will be speaking mainly of how Nord Stream 2 is impacting Ukraine. However, once again, the project has a broader regional security threat. For Ukraine, the transit, as of today, this is one of the key security measures against even further Russian aggression. The pipeline goes across the whole country. So when we look at our map and we see the pipeline, and we know that Europe depends on Russian gas coming to Europe, we understand that the leadership of the country which is exporting this gas has to include into their consideration that should the pipeline be non-existent and the other backup options are non-existent, they cannot get their revenues for the gas from Europe. Just in 2017, my country, Naftogaz, the state-owned company, which has an agreement with Gazprom for transit of the gas, we transported 93 BCM of gas, which was the highest number in the last 8 years, which is to prove that with the current capacity, and once again, the current capacity of the pipeline system is such, it's around 145 BCM. Even with the existing capacity, all the gas Europe needs can be transported without any additional cost. So we in Ukraine, we really don't understand why would we want to invest tens of billions into building a new gas pipeline which is going under the sea. So, but once again, as I said, for us, what we are concerned of right now is potential damage to our security system, to our ability to restrain aggressor from further attacks. And also, I'd like to note the financial side of the deal. As of now, Ukraine is getting, and Madam Spettiswood would correct me if I am wrong, something between $2 billion and $3 billion. It all depends, of course, on the volumes of the gas being transported. So, of course, this is for a country which is at war with Russia. It is a very serious consideration. It comes almost equal as our military budget. So we are concerned. We have, due reasons to be concerned. Some of my colleagues from the second committee today, they mentioned that some of the permits were issued. Yes, it is true. Some of the countries issued permits, but at the same time, let's say in Sweden, a few weeks ago, the permit was issued, and at the same time, leadership of the country started new military mission to test all the security issues. Why is that? Because if Nord Stream 2 being in place, it will, together with Nord Stream 1, they will transport, both lines will transport about 80% of overall demand in Europe of the gas being exported from Russia, which means that these two pipelines, they become of extreme strategic importance to Russia. And of course, they may demand on the grounds of the need for protection, as they were protecting people in my own country in Donetsk and Lugansk, they may demand protection of the pipeline over the Baltic Sea. So some of the countries in that region are strongly concerned about the potential implication of such geopolitical shift between the different pipelines. So very often we hear once again that the project is commercial. However, just the official information on the number of German politicians on all levels, including parliament, government, former politicians, and let me remind you, former Chancellor of this country, Chancellor Schröder, was advocating for the pipeline during his tenure as a chancellor, after it immediately, and now he sits on the board of Gazprom. And I think that's one of the evidences that this project is nothing but commercial. It is very much politically supported by some of the lobbyists, which prefer not to talk about this project vis-a-vis general public in this country and in any other countries. Right now, Ukraine is demanding the change of EU directive into EU legislation as a country which just passed major legislation demanding very painful reforms in energy in our own country. We comply with third energy package, and we demand that all countries which are transporting, producing and participating gas in European market, they to be in compliance with all the ideas of equal position which were transported in third energy package. So as we encourage states to debate, this issue in European Parliament, we see how some countries abstract just the mere idea of the debate. So we clearly see that some politicians stand to lobby for the project and prefer to keep silent about all the nitty-gritty details about this project. Why is that? Because politicians will bear responsibility for their decision-making as they go along, these debates and their statements, and that's why we encourage. I travel a lot in my capacity as an MP. I travel from country to country, and I try to encourage politicians to make their statements. If they are in favor of Nord Stream 2, we will come back to them, as the threats will definitely come, as more politicians will be corrupted in Europe over the direct gas deals with Russia, as they will see, tremendous shift of power on energy market, because let's face reality, 80% of overall gas coming to Europe will be coming through one particular country, and this country will have a strategic dominance over other countries in the region. That's why, to no surprise, Poland, Hungary, Czech Republic, Bulgaria, they all have their own concerns, because they are not sure how they will be getting their gas after Nord Stream 2 will be built. My final comment will be towards one of the recent statements made by Chancellor Merkel, who said recently, and I quote, "In our view, the Nord Stream 2 project is not possible without clarity of how Ukraine's transit role will continue. From this, you can already see that this is not just an economic project, but that, of course, political factors must also be taken into account." And I do appreciate Chancellor Merkel's role in helping Ukraine to overcome our crisis, war with Russia. She is an active advocate of Minsk agreement and other agreements we have in order to bring peace to my country. However, I would like to comment that Ukraine is very reluctant to believe in any possible paper guarantees which might be offered by Russia. We already have Budapest agreement, we already have Minsk agreement, and we have sort of like we can calculate with the Nord Stream 2 in place and Turkish Stream being in place, Ukraine is left with, 10 BCM of gas potentially transported through Ukraine. We are very aware of the prognosis about the demand in Europe, and we know that there is no such a huge increase of demand on European side to compensate for the new pipeline. So we are not gonna keep the system running if it's just about 10, 15, 30 BCM of gas being transported. The system is so complex. It was built by Soviets, so meaning like very reliable, very sophisticated system. We will not sustain as a backup country for EU energy market. It is our political position to fight against Nord Stream 2. We will do it fiercely, and we will make sure that all our arguments are heard. That would be my comment.
Thank you, Olga. I will give the floor to Mrs. Claire Spottiswoode, the chairperson of NAFTAGAS. Supervisory board of NAFTAGAS, sorry.
Good morning, everyone. I've only been chair of NAFTAGAS since the beginning of this year, so I am very new to this subject, and I'm quite sure that many of you know a lot more about Nord Stream 2 than I do. However, I have to say it is something that just surprises me, coming to this brand new. And there was a very good report done by the Russians, I'm not sure how to pronounce it, recently, which showed pretty conclusively that Nord Stream 2 is clearly unprofitable. It's most profitable for the company's suppliers, not its shareholders. And so it's not a surprise that Gazprom's share price is so low compared to its assets, because it does this sort of again and again. And by the way, the analyst who wrote that report got fired days after the report reached the media. So, if you say, well, this is not profitable for Gazprom, it's clearly not a sensible thing commercially for the country to do, then why is Nord Stream 2 so, of the Russians, I know you have to see this, the Russians, not Gazprom, so keen for it to be built. And, I mean, to follow on what Olga and the others have said, it's clearly geopolitical. There is no other reason for Nord Stream 2 to be built other than to consolidate Gazprom's power and to cut out Ukraine. Because clearly Russia's got a huge geopolitical interest in Nord Stream 2. That's the only reason for building it. And if Nord Stream 2 is built, they are aware, as indeed we are, that there will be hardly any need for a Ukrainian transit system after that. So we will have to downsize it in a big way. But I think even more importantly, if Russia doesn't have to pass a lot of its gas that it is exporting to Europe, which is key for its economy, through Ukraine, then what is to stop it going further than it did before with Crimea, and to really, because it has no incentive anymore to avoid further escalation. And that is going to affect us all. It's going to affect us in the UK, it's certainly going to affect you here in Germany, and it's going to affect America and indeed all the other nations. So if it is geopolitical, it is quite clear that Russia is intending that Ukraine loses the ability to transit its gas, and therefore it doesn't have to worry about whether Ukraine is there to transport its gas. So I think the mere fact of an actual Nord Stream 2 could genuinely destabilise peace and security in Europe, and well, clearly in Eastern Europe, and it will have ramifications throughout the rest of the world and Europe. So I'm struggling myself personally to understand why it is that Germany seems so keen for Nord Stream 2 to be built. And I think it's very important that the West embraces decisive policies to ensure that we don't have this destabilisation that Nord Stream 2 would provide. And I'm going to talk a little bit later about just what we might do. But Olga said about capacity. We have in the Ukrainian system, the way Gazprom currently runs the system is the Nord Stream and existing Nord Stream pipeline and Yamal are constantly and full unless they're down for maintenance or whatever. And Ukraine is the balancing provider of capacity. So we are doing the balancing residual amount now. If Nord Stream 2 is built and Turkish Stream is built, then clearly we'll still be in the balancing capacity. It'll just be on a very, very small capacity. And it will not be worth keeping the Ukrainian system going. We'll have to downsize very dramatically. And I think it doesn't seem to be realised that two things. First of all, Olga said it, but I'll repeat it. We have nearly 55 BCM spare capacity in the Ukrainian system already. So capacity is not what is missing in Europe. I understand from people that I have talked to that Putin is going around saying that the Ukrainian system is very decrepit, that it needs a lot of investment. It is true, it was built a long time ago. It was built with a lot of resilience and there's lots of capacity within the system, and it will require some investment. But we, in Naftogaz, we think that we'll probably spend something like $300 million a year over the next 5 years. It's nothing like the cost of Nord Stream 2. And clearly, because that capacity already exists, Ukraine has never failed in delivering gas to Europe. Never once failed. Not even a small amount. It has never failed. So, building Nord Stream 2, apart from its cost, will replicate existing, flexible, resilient capacity to carry all the gas and more that Europe needs. Is going to the same customers in the same places, but by a longer route. So what is the economic sense in that? There is none. This is not an economic project. It is purely political. You're going to sacrifice 146 BCM of Ukrainian capacity with its integrated, interconnected network with a lot of infrastructure and compressors, and you're going to exchange that for two offshore pipelines which have two compressors, and which is going to ensure that the monopoly of Gazprom gets even stronger. And we know that Ukraine will always get the residual gas. It's never going to be, unless the contract is written for it specifically, it's always going, Gazprom is always going to prioritise its own pipelines. And I think that should worry all of us, because Gazprom is a very dominant company. It is already supplying nearly half of Europe's gas. It is a monopolist in some areas of Europe, and everywhere it is a huge player, and it uses its dominance. It uses its dominance to discriminate in its pricing. Prices often depend on the level of political loyalty to Russia. Now that's odd in the first place. Western buyers normally pay less than their Eastern European counterparts, despite the fact it's cheaper to get that gas to Eastern Europe than it is to get it to the West. And while Russia at the moment it has no choice but to ship its gas through Ukraine, such price differentiation and discrimination can be disputed in arbitration, as indeed we have done recently. But once Nord Stream 2 is built, this difference can be kind of explained because the new route is going to be longer and it's going to be clearly more expensive. Kind of what's the sense in that? But it will be. And therefore Russia will have more right to charge under the courts higher prices in Eastern Europe, despite the fact that they're replacing an existing capacity that exists and will be cheaper to deliver to. It is clear that Gazprom can play with transfer pricing between its transit and supply services, which is one of the reasons it doesn't want EU law applied to it, because under EU law, for very good reasons, you split pipelines and supply and the ownership of the molecules, because it means that it's much more difficult to play these games. Russia wants to play these games, so it has no interest in obeying and being subject to EU law. And actually, just a bit of a background, I was the UK gas regulator who was responsible for introducing competition into the UK back in 1995-6. And I find it quite strange coming back as now chair of Naftogaz and seeing all the EU directives, which seem to be a carbon copy of what we did all those years ago. So kind of I'm very familiar with the reasons and rationale for why the European directives are as they are. And we have to assume that with Nord Stream 2, therefore, Eastern gas prices will go up. Eastern European gas prices will go up after Nord Stream 2 is built, as is likely to happen in Southern Europe too. Germany may well be better off, which may be one of the reasons that Germany is quite keen to have this pipe. But it is your customers outside Germany who are definitely going to be disadvantaged. So what should be done? I mean, clearly, we all think that Nord Stream 2 should be stopped. If Nord Stream 2 goes ahead, then it becomes really important to ensure that it is subject to EU energy directives, as indeed should Ukraine. And I know that there's a lot of debate at the moment. I mean, Naftogaz has been seen to be quite obstructive to getting unbundling done in Ukraine. I can assure you we are not. And I am personally getting very involved in the whole unbundling programme in Ukraine to ensure that we do unbundle our pipelines, that we do adhere to the European directives, and that we are in place as soon as our existing Gazprom contract finishes to have a completely EU compliant gas system in Ukraine. We need to apply the same rules to Nord Stream 2 as well. One other issue, I mean, there has been some talk that the German government is trying to broker a 20 or 30 or 40 BCM deal with Gazprom lasting for 20 years. Now that's all fine, except that unless that is subject to EU laws, under what courts will that contract be run? Why can Russia, the day after this is signed, say, well, I'm sorry, if something's failed in Russia, we can't any longer deliver gas through that pipeline? It is very important that any contract is under the EU, as an EU compliant gas laws. So I think that's probably all I will say for the time being. I think it's really important to have questions. But as a conclusion, I just think it is very important, because if we do get EU gas directives into some of these contracts which are interacting with Gazprom, we're more likely to encourage competition within Russia one day. We're more likely to encourage competition with all the suppliers outside Russia. And so we're much more likely to have a sensible gas energy industry going forward.
Thank you. Now, remarks from Mr. John Whittingdale, the Member of Parliament of the United Kingdom.
Thank you. I'd like to thank the Ukrainian delegation for organising this. Let me assure you, this is not a sort of attempt at a British takeover of the panel, but Claire speaks with great experience, having been involved in the regulation of our gas industry in the UK. And I wanted to speak both as the chairman of the friendship group in the British Parliament, not just with Ukraine, but actually also with Moldova, Belarus and Lithuania. But I have a long-standing interest and affection for Ukraine. But I think that it goes beyond our concern simply about the impact on Ukraine and its immediate neighbours. I think there is a very serious strategic issue which affects the security of the West. And I do want to set it in context. It is a matter of sadness to me, because I have an affection for Russia as well, but relations between Russia and the West have become steadily worse, and we are seeing what is termed by a number of commentators as hybrid warfare being waged against a number of countries. In its most dramatic example, that is direct military aggression, both with the occupation of Crimea and the support for separatists in Donbass, and the military manoeuvres that take place against the borders of all the Baltic nations and Poland. We have seen attempts to interfere in the electoral process in a number of Western countries. We've seen active disinformation campaigns, and we have seen attempted assassinations carried out, particularly on the soil of my own country, which led yesterday to the death of a British citizen, for which we do hold Russia responsible. And Nord Stream 2 was described by the Polish Prime Minister as a new hybrid weapon. Russia has a very long history of using its power in terms of gas for its own political ends. Claire has talked a little bit about, as did Olga, about the way in which Russia has used gas against Ukraine, most dramatically when they obviously cut off supply altogether. 2009 and 2014 are both years in which there was massive disruption to the energy markets deliberately caused by Russia, influencing either the price of gas or in some cases actually cutting it off altogether. And when one comes to look at the enormous amount of money that will be required to build the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, it is very hard, as Claire has set out, to see any economic reason why you would wish to invest when there is a perfectly viable existing pipeline network which is able to cope with the foreseeable demand for gas without having spent $11 billion building an additional one. So that does lead one to ask why anybody would want to do that. And the answer is a very simple one. This is not a commercial project, as has been claimed. It is a political project. It will have the most dramatic effect on Ukraine, both immediately in terms of the economic impact on Ukraine as a result of the significant fall and possible removal altogether of transit payments. And that, having already affected the economics of the country through a loss of a large part of the industrial production in the east, to have a further blow in terms of the income is going to have enormous damage to the Ukrainian economy. But beyond that, there is also the strategic question, in that it removes perhaps one of the restraints that have prevented additional military aggression in the past in terms of the risk of disrupting the gas supply. And that is a concern which obviously doesn't just affect Ukraine. In the last few months, I have met the Foreign Minister of Lithuania, who spoke out very strongly about concerns not just in Lithuania but across the Baltic countries about the impact of Nord Stream 2. I've met the Foreign Minister of Moldova, who is equally concerned. And of course I have talked to Olga and her colleagues in the Rada. My colleague in the British Parliament, who I work with, Daniel Kaczynski, the only Polish-born member of the British Parliament, has spoken out because the impact it has on Poland. I quoted to you at the beginning the comments of the Polish Prime Minister. So this is a project which is causing real anxiety amongst all those countries which were either formerly part of the Soviet Union or are close by to it and are going to be directly affected. But even those of us who sit at the end of the pipeline are going to be potentially at some risk. We are seeing, for instance, the phasing out of nuclear power in Germany. In my own country, our nuclear generation is coming to an end, and it's going to be some time before new capacity comes on stream. We are going to become more dependent upon gas supplies, and Claire has set out the way in which Gazprom is becoming steadily more dominant. And where you have a dominant player, the temptation will always be to abuse that position as a monopolistic supplier. I'm an admirer of the work Claire did in Britain to try and prevent monopolies emerging, because we know, as believers in markets, monopolies are dangerous. But when you have a monopoly that is controlled by someone who is prepared to use it not just for economic ends but for political ends, that becomes all the more dangerous. And therefore the concern that is expressed by Ukraine is shared right across Western Europe, and indeed further, because the Americans, I think, have also seen the risk that this poses and have been quite vocal expressing their concern. So this is a matter which I have been raising in the British Parliament. I intend to do so again. I think it is absolutely right that it should be raised at the OSCE, and therefore I wanted to be here to express my full support for the campaign which Ukraine and Olga are conducting to try and make sure this doesn't go ahead.
Thank you, John, for your remarks. And now I introduce Mr. Eugene Chali, the head of the Ukrainian World Congress.
Thank you. When I was a young student in law school, they taught me that when you have a poor case in facts, you plead the law. When you have a poor case in law, you plead the facts. And when you have a poor case both in law and in facts, you confuse the issue. The proponents of Nord Stream 2 are confusing the issue, and I will attempt to simplify this by asking ourselves some basic questions and providing some basic, simple answers. First of all, as was already said, if Nord Stream 2 is constructed, it would double the Nord Stream's total capacity from 55 billion cubic meters to 110 billion cubic meters. First question, is it necessary for Europe? The answer is a clear no, since the Gazprom is currently using only 60% of the existing total gas transit capacity available for export to Europe. Is it necessary for the Russian Federation? The answer is again a clear yes, because it completely eliminates Ukraine as a transit country for Russian gas exports. It is worthwhile to remember that until the Orange Revolution in 2004, when Ukraine elected a democratic and independent president in Viktor Yushchenko, and subsequent gas crisis of 2006 and 2009, Gazprom was booking the total capacity of the Ukrainian gas transit system. After these events, the Russian Federation built Nord Stream 1 and is currently transferring through Ukraine about only 50% of all Russian exports to Europe and Turkey. Nord Stream 2 would completely eliminate that 50% and Ukraine as a transit country for Russian gas and exports. What does Nord Stream 2 do to Ukraine? It gives, as was said, a severe negative blow to Ukraine's economy, as Ukraine earned about $3 billion from the transit of Russian gas to the EU in 2017, which represents about 3% of Ukraine's GDP, and Ukraine's GDP rose by 2.5% in 2017. It will force, as was already said, Ukraine to downsize its system. That will cause thousands of jobs to be lost. it will impact on the gas reverse that Ukraine negotiated with its neighboring countries and necessarily create shortages of gas in Ukraine. And all of this means that Ukraine will become more vulnerable, and this increases dramatically the chances of additional and more invasive Russian military aggression against Ukraine. What does Nord Stream 2 mean for Europe? Uncertainty, higher gas prices, vulnerability, and total dependence on the Russian Federation for the import of gas. Quite a partner. Has the Russian Federation been a reliable partner with gas supply in the past? The answer is again a clear no. The Russian Federation has used gas as a bargaining tool and a political weapon time and again. This practice goes back to the USSR years when the Soviets cut off gas to Yugoslavia in 1948, Israel after the invasion of the Suez Canal in 1956, China in 1967 when tensions arose between the USSR and China. More recently, the Russian Federation cut off gas to Ukraine and by extension to Western Europe in 1992 and 1993 following a pricing dispute, to Georgia in 2000 because of resistance to demands by the Russian Federation, to Belarus in 2002 following a pricing dispute, to Lithuania in 2005 because of resistance to demands of the Russian Federation, and to the infamous 2009 crisis when the Russian Federation turned off the flow of gas for 13 days, causing major disruptions in Europe in the midst of a freezing winter. Tens of thousands of homes across 20 countries of Europe were freezing for 13 days. And about 10 people froze to death in Poland, where the temperatures dropped to -25. According to the Swedish Defense Research Agency, over the period from 1991 to 2004, the Russian Federation shut off gas to Central and Eastern European countries and Baltic countries 40 times for various political reasons. Today, when people say that Nord Stream 2 is a commercial endeavor, I think one should go back and ask the same people that are saying this how they were convincing the French that notwithstanding that France had a contract regarding the sale of Mistrals, that there was something more important than a commercial contract, namely fundamental values, namely the security of Europe. That should be reminded once again today. If Nord Stream 2 is built, we will give a country that blatantly violates international norms, numerous bilateral and multilateral agreements and covenants, the territorial integrity of independent countries, including Georgia and Ukraine, human rights, the possibility to freeze Europe in order to advance any political agenda it chooses. If Nord Stream 2 is built, the Russian Federation will have an additional tool in its hybrid arsenal, which already includes military aggression, cyber attacks, state-sponsored terrorism, interference with the democratic processes of foreign countries, including the interference in the presidential elections in the United States and in France, sponsorship of political parties in foreign countries, fake news, and now energy. That is the simple, complete picture of what's at stake. And anybody who promotes Nord Stream 2 under those circumstances is blatantly uninformed or asking for serious trouble. Thank you.
Thank you very much, colleagues, for your remarks. We can start a Q&A session if someone has some questions, please. No questions? Yeah, please.
So Joel Wiegert, the U.S. Embassy here in Berlin, and I think the U.S. opposition to Nord Stream 2 is very clearly on the record. But often in my meetings with Germans about Nord Stream 2, one of the issues they point to is something you alluded to about the reliability of the Ukrainian transit pipeline. And I wonder if you could go a little bit more detail about what's being done, what the status is now, and what's actually being done to improve that situation. Because often they cite it as the Ukrainian system is a threat to European security because of the reliability problem. So I just wondered if you could talk a little bit about that.
Okay, with pleasure. Actually, just a few months ago, we had a very high-level delegation from the OSCE's leadership, and I took them to UTG, which is Ukrtransgaz, a company which is transporting gas in Ukraine. I took them to the command center of that company, which is actually quite an unusual event to engage somebody who is a politician from another country. It's still under security protection. It's considered as critical infrastructure. But we are willingly share all the details about the condition of UTG's capacity as of now because we have nothing to hide. As I said, just in the last years, we transported so much gas that Europe cannot complain. I was basically, when we engaged Claire to come here, I said to her, well, your goal is to inspire everybody in the room that whatever Europe needs, Ukraine can do it. And this is how it is right now. We have capacity of 145. Most of the pipes along the route they have backup options. We had a military explosion next to Donbass region. Europe didn't even know about it. Nobody noticed in Europe that we had an accident because we could easily switch from one pipeline to another because we have so many extra capacity. Once again, it was built by Soviets, At that time, everybody was like, doing it to the extreme. And right now, as Claire was saying, there are discussions about the need for additional investment. That's why Ukrainian political elite, including parliament, president, prime minister, everybody is now working on engaging strong, reliable EU or transatlantic partner to jointly operate the system. We're not talking about selling it. We are saying, if Europe has some concerns about reliability of the system, don't go with Nord Stream 2, come on consortium with us, manage it together with us. All we need from the pipeline, we need protection for, given our current security situation, we want it to run according to EU standards. We will never interfere. We will never stop any supply to Europe. We are developing our own gas reserves, so we are working on our own gas resilience plan to make sure that our country is self-dependent in terms of gas supply for our own needs. We are working on energy efficiency issues. We really want to kind of make sure that Ukraine is not an obstacle between the transit between Russia and Europe, but we want to be included into this geopolitical issue because gas pipelines are always geopolitical.
Yeah, if I can just add, I'm not sure of the long history of Naftogaz, but I'm not aware of any time that we've actually failed to deliver to Europe. And it just so happened my first ever visit to the control room at UGG, there had been an explosion on the European border which shut one of the export pipelines down completely. And I was there as they did the workaround. And again, nobody in Europe noticed. And it was actually quite a major disruption to services. Now, that happened on Nord Stream 2. There wouldn't be much resilience. But because we can divert through all the other pipelines, there is actually a lot of resilience. I think the danger is political, because if Russia cuts off all supplies through Ukraine, there's a problem. But if we've got the gas, I think there's no problem with the capacity, either the capacity or the resilience, or the strength of the system. So if anyone can point to any, I'd like to know about them, because then I should go back and investigate. But I'm not aware of any, ever. So people should just give some facts, I think.
Thank you. Some other questions? If not, I will thank... please introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Paul Massara. I work for the U.S. Congress. Good to see my state colleague here. My question is, what are the concrete measures that need to be taken to stop Nord Stream 2, and sort of where is the finish line for you all? Like, I mean, at what point would you say the project's over, it's done with, it's been, beat, don't need to worry about it anymore? Also, how far along is it already?
I'd say it's not done until it's done, meaning the pipeline should go from point A to B, and until then we will resist. And concrete measures, as Madam Spettiswoode said, even if it's built, it has to fully comply with the rules which are against monopolization of one route over another or one party over another, So this is why we are fighting to include amendments to EU directives. That's one measure. While one permission is still missing from Denmark, they have their own considerations of security measures and security situation. We expect that. Even if it's declined, then there is a need for designers of the project to go around Denmark, which will make it complex, and then we will remind everybody of the security reasons because of the weaponry which is left from the World War II being on the ground of the sea. There are other issues, but I almost feel like not sharing right now because I really think it's a geopolitical project where leaders have to agree what has to be done. So we do watch closely what is happening in your Congress. We see some initiatives being raised bipartisan, initiatives in your Congress. We think that the history suggests that if your country is taking direct measures, be it sanctions or other types of influence over threats to stability and peace, that's helpful. That's very helpful. So we are working with all parties involved to encourage public debates. Even in this country, some of the ecological organizations now are protesting. They file court appeals to the project on the ground of the environmental suspicions. So we watch closely what is happening. Our goal right now, as I said, is to raise public debates and make sure that everybody understands facts and truths about the potential implications.
Congressman, if I can continue applying the KISS principle, keep it simple, I'll say this. I know as a lawyer that practices that no company wants to be sanctioned by the United States. If the United States sanctions companies that are involved in Nord Stream 2, no matter where it's at, it stops dead right there. That's why I encourage the United States to do that.
I would just quickly add, there are several vehicles available to us. There is, as Clara said, the EU. My country is about to leave the EU, so I don't set a great deal of store in necessarily the effectiveness of that. But there is also political pressure. There is the direct ability of those countries that have a say, such as Denmark, if they decide that it is against their interests. But there is also the political dialogue. So I hope that my government, I hope that other Western governments, particularly from the Baltics and elsewhere, will try and make a case to Germany as to why this is not a good idea. And then ultimately, there is, as being said, your country. And not only do we note the vote in the Senate in 1982 in favour of sanctions, or the ability to impose sanctions, it, I hope, will be an item on the agenda for the meeting taking place in a few days' time with President Putin, and I hope your President will raise any concerns directly.
Well, in a talking point that I just want to raise real quick is that you all are probably aware, but the CATSA legislation, the Countering America's Adversary Through Sanctions Act, does contain language in it that says that it is U.S. policy to be opposed to Nord Stream 2.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you very much. My name is Andre Unko. I'm member of the Left Party in Germany. This is our faction room. It's called the Clara Zetkin room. So she was a former communist. She had to flee in 1933 to Moscow. Just welcome. I want to say welcome. I can tell you, it seems that I'm the only German politician here. For my party, we are not direct advocate of Nord Stream 2, but we have maybe a bit different view because our emphasis is on finding ways coming out of the gas and oil energy system, and we were looking for renewable energies. But the debate on Nord Stream 2 is in Germany as well. There are a lot of people saying that yes, we don't know exactly, do we need so much gas in Europe? But if we don't need, why it is built at the same time terminals in Europe for liquid gas from US? There are more than 1 billion invested by the European Commission at the moment for a huge system of importing US, from other countries as well, gas coming out of fracking system, which is a problem for the climate as well. So there is a more differentiated debate we have in our party. And one question is, except from the question of sanctions, and this is a bit, if you sanction now Nord Stream 2 companies and at the same time importing US fracking gas, this is seems a bit strange. It seems like an economic competition, but except aside from sanctions, how? Because Nord Stream 2 is built at the moment. What do you see? Possibilities do you see to stop Nord Stream 2?
Let me just say.
Yeah, I think it's very straightforward why you would, if you were Europe, try and ensure you had diverse supplies of gas. Why on earth would you want to increase the domination of Gazprom, which, as we know, is a very politically led supply of gas? It'd be very dangerous for Europe not to ensure that it had diversity of supply. So I think the answer is not about gas, it's about resilience and diversity of supply. So that makes a lot of sense to me. What doesn't make any sense is creating more capacity when we've already got all the capacity we need and more. That makes no sense. Why on earth are you investing in a pipeline which is not required at all? So that's the weird thing.
Because if you have competition at the market and no monopoly, you can, if we are speaking about households and the interest of the people of the Europe, Germans, you can have better prices. If the market, the more connectors, the more gas flows, the more competition, the lower the price. And if you have monopoly, Gazprom just can, do whatever he wants with the flows, with the prices. So I think that the more competition on the gas market is in the interest of the people themselves. We're not saying even about the geopolitics, some global things, but the people will win if more companies and more states will be on the telemarket in Europe.
If I may, I will offer you my version to your question. First of all, we had a history of stopping such projects. Think about South Stream, which was stopped at some point. Secondly, when you say is being built, what exactly is being built? You know, the investment which is undergoing right now, it's peanuts. It's nothing compared to the potential danger of the overall project. So we are peers, you know, as I said, we bear political responsibility. So as we look at the situation right now, our choices are keep silent and see what will happen. And if I'm right, drama will happen in Ukraine and in the neighboring region. And guess what? You will have to react to what is happening in Ukraine. You cannot, you know, keep silence and not to see that, you know, aggression is going to the extreme. Okay, if we go back to, you know, current history, do you know how the price is set in Belarus for gas? Do you know how negotiations are done with Bulgarians, Hungarians? I mean, do I really need to remind you of like the market principles of corrupting politicians and not to mention my own country. My own country presidents were elected on the grounds of promise of how they will agree with Putin. Crimea was annexed in part because of the, you know, gas issue and the discounts our former president, you know, victoriously got from Putin. I mean, we may look at it, okay, wonderful deal, let's see how it goes, or we may look at it, wow, that's an interesting deal, we should be very careful about, and something will happen which will cost us greatly. Not to mention the 10 billion, at least $10 billion dollars, which has to be invested. And to a point about LNG, as Ukraine, right now, we do not plan, in particular, building LNG capacity because we have our own restraints, geographical, political, financial. But I think the whole point of EU directive was to diversify the source and the route. So right now, when we are not saying Ukraine is the only route, but you know what is happening in Germany is it is actually becoming the only route, the main route. This is not diversification. If anything goes wrong with one of the other pipeline, you are very vulnerable to the only route which exists. So that's my view on it.
Thank you. Any further questions? No? Then I will thank my colleagues. I will thank Claire and John and Eugene for these remarkable reports. I will thank Olga. Thank you everyone for interest and for coming to our